We go to the doctor's office. We pull up in the parking lot. We out in the parking lot, there's cars, there's a building. We go to the hospital, we're in the parking lot, there's a building, there's cars. We go in the building. We go sit in the waiting room. We talk to the person at the desk. We tell them what's wrong. We sit down and we wait. We don't sit on the outside of the building and wait. Sometimes you do if the building's small and there's a lot of people. You may have to go sit outside. But for the most part, you sit in the waiting room and you wait. And then the nurse calls you in. You go in another room. They check you out. They prep you. Especially if you're having surgery, they prep you. They get you ready to go, whatever the case is going to be. And the very last thing you do, you see the doctor. Once you've done been through stage 1, stage 2, 3, you finally get to see the doctor. And you're 10 minutes in there with the doctor, and then you're done. You might be at the doctor's office for 2 hours, but you only see the doctor for about 10, 15 minutes most of the time. And guess what? Those 10 or 15 minutes are more important than that other hour and 45 minutes you was at the hospital for, you was at the doctor's office for. Don't get me wrong, that checking in point's important. The waiting doesn't matter. To get the nurse checking you out and making sure you're prepped good is important, but not as important as it is when you see that doctor. Same thing with God. We can come in this building. We can hang out in the parking lot over here. Doesn't do us any good. We can walk through the foyer. We can hang out in the foyer. We can come. We can sit in the pews. We can sit here for an hour. We can sit in the foyer for 20 minutes, out in the parking lot for 30 minutes. But when we get up, we come to this altar. We meet God at this altar. You can be here for 10 minutes, an hour. That's going to be the most important time, is when you experience God, when you meet God, when you meet that doctor. But sometimes we don't get to the altar. I'll go next time, or I'll go next week, or I just don't feel right. Growing up, I was always like that. I didn't want to raise my hands in church. I didn't want to get up and come to the altar. I didn't want to sit in the front row. I was embarrassed. I was shy. Didn't want to get in front of people and speak and do this and do that. I was always like that. And then one day it hit me. And now I don't care. It doesn't matter what the person next to me thinks or the person behind me thinks. It doesn't matter. It only matters what he thinks. When we go to the doctor because we got a problem and we need a solution, or we go to get checked up to make sure we don't have a problem before we get one. We can do a pre-screening, just a physical, check yourself out. Same thing with church. We don't always have to come to God when we're in trouble. We don't always have to come to God when we need him. We can come to him anytime we want for any reason. We can come at this altar and sit here just because we want to be in his presence. Or we can come and sit at this altar because we're going through something and we need God's hand on our life. No matter the situation, no matter the reason or why, you need to go to God. No matter what it is, we can take anything to God. Title of the message, Take It to the Altar. An altar is a raised structure typically made of earth or unwrought stone, used for offering sacrifices and other worship rituals to God. It's a place where offerings, often animals, are burned or sacrificed to honor God. It can also be a place of prayer and devotion. Now, an altar today is a lot different than it was 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. When Noah made an altar, or Abraham made an altar. It didn't look like this wooden bench right here. I can promise you that. You know, Moses made an altar. He constructed stones. He had 12 stones. Same thing Isaac did. You know, they put the stones down, and that's where they'd see God. You know, they would kill an animal and bring it to the altar for a sacrifice. That's what they did. The Hebrew word for altar is, I can't even pronounce it, mizbeah, from a verbal root meaning to slaughter. Greek renders this word as, I can't pronounce this word neither, a place of sacrifice in the developed temple ritual. The same word is used for both the altar of Holocaust and the altar of incense. And sacrifice, an act of giving up something valued for the sake of something else, regarded as more important or worthy. We must all be prepared to make sacrifices. You know, they would slaughter a sacrifice on the altar. That was the main point of the altar. They'd come, you know, they'd grab an animal, which was very important to them because that's how they ate. They didn't have a grocery store to go run to and grab some meat and throw it on the grill. They had to go out back and grab a lamb, grab a bull, whatever they had, and slaughter it and eat it. So they'd take it, they'd kill it, put it on the altar, and ask God to forgive them for their sins. It says, without the shedding of blood, there can be no forgiveness of sins. You know? More detailed look. The purpose of the altar were primarily used for offering sacrifices, a way of atonement for sin and demonstrating reverence for God. They also served as a place for prayer and praising God. You know, altars were typically made of earth or unwrought stone, as described in Exodus 20, 24 through 25. Significance. Altars represented a place of encounter with God, a memorial of spiritual experiences, and a symbol of covenant relationship. Hebrews 3:10 speaks of Christians having an altar from which those who serve the tabernacle have no right to eat, implying that the true altar for believers is not a physical one, but a spiritual one centered on Christ. Romans 2:1 encourages believers to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, suggesting that in the new covenant, believers themselves become the altar and the sacrifice. Revelation uses the imagery of an altar in heaven, representing the place where prayers of the saints are offered to God. You know, back in the Old Testament, years ago, they had two types of altars. You know, it describes the altar of burnt offerings and the altar of incense. You know, they'd burn the animal, and in one they do incense. They'd offer incense to God. These were primarily altars within the tabernacle and later the temple. Additionally, the Bible mentions other altars, but by individuals like Noah, Abraham, and Isaac, often associated with specific events or locations. The burnt offering. This altar made of bronze was used for offering burnt offerings, a type of sacrifice where the entire animal was consumed on the fire. It was located in the outer courts of the tabernacle and later the temple. Altar of incense. This small altar, made of acacia wood and overlaid with gold, was used for offering incense, a fragrant offering associated with prayer and worship. It was located in the inner sanctuary of the tabernacle and later the temple. So they had the burnt offering for the forgiveness of sins. And then they do incense as a type of praise and worship towards God. The Bible also describes altars built by individuals like Noah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in various locations. These were often erected after special events or revelations and served as a place of prayer, worship, and sacrifice. For example, Abraham built 4 altars during his lifetime, according to Crosswinds Church. So they would go into battle, they'd finish, they'd be victorious. They may construct an altar, give God praise and worship. They may construct one before battle, asking him for victory, to keep them safe, whatever the reason would be. You know, Elijah, before he confronted the prophets of Baal, he let them do their nonsense and their foolishness. And before he called on God, what did he do? He says he constructed an altar. He filled it up with water, built a trench, filled it up with water, and the fire of God came down and dried it up. Genesis 8:20. This is the first sign of an altar being constructed in the Bible. Some say Adam and Eve may have made one, but the actual first one it talks about in the Bible, it says, Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and there he sacrificed as burnt offerings the animals and birds that had been approved for that purpose. And you know, they couldn't just put any animal on the altar. It had to be pure and perfect, without blemish and holy. Same thing with Jesus. He's our animal. He's our sacrifice that went on that altar. Perfect, pure, holy, white as snow. Genesis 12:7, it says, Then the Lord appeared to Abraham and said, I will give this land to your descendants. And Abraham built an altar there and dedicated it to the Lord who had appeared to him. So he built an altar. Abraham built an altar just to dedicate it to the Lord, this land he gave him. You know, altars have so much different things you can use them for. Throughout the Bible, they did. You know, my whole life, I've never realized the importance of the altar until I decided to seek God and get deep into God, you know. And I'm not going to say that, hey, you got to come to the church and you got to sit on the pew, the bench in front of the sanctuary right here to find God. Because you don't. You can have an altar at your house. You can kneel by your bedside. You can kneel wherever and find God. Used to be in the Old Testament, when they built the altar and they constructed the altar, God would show up. That's why they had the Ark of the Covenant they would carry around. And when they would stop, they'd build a little temple-like, and they'd worship God right there. And you'd see the smoke go up, and God was there. But it's different now. We can find God wherever we're at. He comes to us, wherever we're at. I don't have to go to a specific church and kneel at a certain altar and think this altar is any better than the one across the street. Or think because I'm kneeling here, I'm going to find God and get more of an experience than if I kneel in my house. God's not seeking out the location. He's seeking out the person seeking him. If you're seeking God and you're on your knees praying, no matter where you're at, you will find him. Genesis 22:9. When they arrived at the place where God had told him to go, Abraham built an altar and arranged the wood on it. Then he tied his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. You know, sometimes we hold near and dear to things in this world. You know, I got a vehicle, I got a house. And I'm not going to let anybody come in my house and mess it up. I'm not going to let anybody come in my house and take things that I've worked hard for and steal something from me. I'm not going to let anybody come in my house and harm my wife and my kids, or outside of my house for that matter. I hold near and dear to them. But sometimes we hold too near and dear to things of this world and not to God. We need to take them things that are holding us bondage and controlling our life and lay them at the foot of the altar and give them to God. You know, God asked Abraham, give me the most important thing in your life. Give me your son Isaac. And he laid Isaac on that altar. He gave up was willing to give up the most important thing in his life. And by him being obedient, God didn't take Isaac. But he wanted to make sure Abraham was willing to do what he asked. He wanted to find out where Abraham's heart was. Does your heart truly lie with me, or does it lie somewhere else? You know, if God tells you today, if you have a job making $1 million a year and God tells you today, give it up, can you? Will you? A lot of people would say, I can't do it. I won't do it. I need that money. I'm accustomed to this living. And they hold on to that money. And when God's saying, if you'd have just gave it up, I was going to bless you with $10 million a year. But you wanted to stay with $1 million. I was going to give you this and this, but you wanted that. We never know the hand of God, what it's going to do in our life until we're 100% obedient to what he tells us to do. If anything in your life that has a hold of you, you need to bring it to the altar. Lay it at the altar and ask God to take it away. Genesis 26:25 says, Then Isaac built an altar there and worshiped the Lord. He set up his camp at that place, and his servants dug another well. So we got Abraham was given a sacrifice. Isaac is worshiping, all at the altar. You know, we come here, we give up things in our life. Or we come here simply to worship God and thank him for things he's done in our life. Genesis 35:1 says, Then God said to Jacob, Get ready and move to Bethel and settle there. Build an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. It's throughout the Bible they made altars for various reasons. And in Exodus 17:50, Moses built an altar there and named it Yahweh Nisa, which means the Lord is my banner. God told Moses in Exodus 20:24-26, he said, Build me an altar made of earth and offer your sacrifices to me, your burnt offerings and peace offerings, your sheep and goats and your cattle. Build my altar where I cause my name to be remembered, and I will come to you and bless you. If you use stones to build my altar, use only natural, uncut stones. Do not shape the stones with a tool, for that would make the altar unfit for holy use. And do not approach my altar by going up steps. If you do, someone might look up under your clothing and see your nakedness. He not only said to build an altar, he had certain specifications, certain ways he wanted to build, certain material to use, certain instructions. You know, Moses could have just threw a couple stones on the ground and, okay, God, I did it. No. Just like he had him build the temple and all that, certain ways. Build the Ark of the Covenant, certain ways they had to do it. Certain material had to be used. It says in Exodus 27:1, using acacia wood, construct a square altar, 7.5 feet wide, 7.5 feet long, and 4.5 feet high. Make horns for each of its four corners so that the horns and altars are all one piece. Overlay the altar with bronze. Make ash buckets, shovels, basins, meat forks, and fire pans, all of bronze. Make a bronze grating for it and attach 4 bronze rings at its 4 corners. Install the grating halfway down the side of the altar, under the ledge. For carrying the altar, make poles from acacia wood and overlay them with bronze. Insert the poles through the rings of the 2 sides of the altar. The altar must be hollow, made from planks. Build it just as you were shown on the mountain. He gave Moses certain instructions. It needs to be this long, this wide, this tall. You know, a certain way, a certain type of wood. Now that was made to offer sacrifices. Then he goes in Exodus 31-10, he tells him how to make one for burning incense. a totally different one. It says, then make another altar of acacia wood for burning incense. Make it 18 inches square and 36 inches high, with horns at the corners carved from the same piece of wood as the altar itself. Overlay the top sides and horns of the altar with pure gold, and run a gold molding around the entire altar. Make 2 gold rings and attach them on opposite sides of the altar below the gold molding to hold the carrying poles. Make the poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Place the incense altar just outside the inner curtain that shields the Ark of the Covenant. In front of the Ark's cover, the place of atonement that covers the tablets inscribed with the terms of the covenant. I will meet with you there. So he built the altar of incense before you would proceed to go to the Ark of the Covenant, which housed the 10 Commandments. It says every morning when Aaron maintains the lamps, he must burn fragrant incense on the altar. And each evening when he lights the lamps, he must again burn incense in the Lord's presence. This must be done from generation to generation. Do not offer any unholy incense on this altar, or any burnt offerings, grain offerings, or liquid offerings. Once a year, Aaron must purify the altars by smearing its horns with blood from the offering made to purify the people from their sin. This will be a regular annual event from generation to generation, for this is the Lord's most holy altar. That was their custom. God gave them plans to build specific altars for certain reasons, down to the T. And Moses followed it, and then he gave them certain instructions on how to proceed, what God wanted. Now, I'd be kind of crazy if I start getting some acacia wood, if I could even tell you where you get that at, and start building all these altars and coming here and a mixed-shaped Ark of the Covenant with the angels on it. People start thinking we're crazy, because we're so used to just seeing this is an altar. An altar. But to me, an altar is where you meet God more than anything. It's not just material, wood, gold. Go to Ephesians 5:2. It says, live a life filled with love, following the example of Christ. He loved us and offered himself as a sacrifice for us, a pleasing aroma to God. God's our sacrifice. Jesus is our sacrifice to God the Father. Without him coming down and dying on that cross, we won't have our sins forgiven. He's our sacrifice for our atonement with God. I don't have to come once a week, once a month, once a year, and bring something here and offer it to God as a burnt offering, an atonement for my sins. Jesus Christ died on that cross once and for all. So all I got to do is accept him and believe on him. Now that doesn't mean I don't need to come to this altar, because I can still come to this altar and praise God and worship God and bring all my problems, all my situations, all my concerns, and lay it at the foot of the altar and let God handle it. When I pray, sometimes I tell God, I'm giving you all of this, and I lay it at the foot of the cross where it was all paid for. Take it. Take control of it. Do what you will with it, but I give it to you. Hebrews 10:10, for God's will was for us to be made holy by the sacrifice of the body of Jesus Christ once for all time. The goats, the lambs, the bulls, the blood of the animals could not make me holy and right with God. Could not make me perfect with God. All that did was cover my sin. Jesus Christ comes down. He sacrifices his perfect and holy body, and his blood washes away my sins. And I believe on that sacrifice of Jesus. Now, when I meet the Father, he's going to look at me, and he's not going to see me. He's not going to see my sins that I've committed. He's not going to see my unholy, imperfect body, person I am. He's going to see Jesus Christ in me. You know, I had this conversation with somebody on the internet the other day, and it was a clip of this guy talking about how we were not born sinners. We were born into a sinful world, and we were not sinners until we first partake in sin. But this guy was preaching. And I made the comment saying, you know, I can't follow this because, as far as I know, I was born a sinner. Boy, and I had people coming at me left and right telling me I was wrong. Somebody even told me I need to go talk to my pastor, let them explain to me what this guy's saying. And the guy in the video, he even quoted that, you know, we're born in the image of God and all this. The thing is this, Adam and Eve were created perfect. They were created without sin. But the moment they ate of the fruit, sin entered them. Therefore, anything from their lineage has sin. Why do you think Jesus Christ was not born of man on earth? He did not have the bloodline of Adam running through him. We do. There's a difference. Because I'm born of man on earth, I have Adam's bloodline running through me. Therefore, I have that sin running through me, that sin nature. Now, Jesus Christ was born of a virgin, of just a woman. Therefore, he does not have Adam's blood running through him. That's what makes him pure and perfect without sin. It's a difference. I was reading this story, and I thought it was pretty interesting. And we all know the story of Martha and Mary, where, you know, one's at the foot of Jesus. You know, Mary's at the foot of Jesus, just enjoying Jesus, entertaining, letting Jesus entertain her, listening to Jesus preach, just being with Jesus. And Martha's running around preparing the meal, preparing this, fixing this, doing things that need to get done. And we see that in the church. You know, there's a few type of people, some that do. They always want to feel like they got to have something they got to do. Well, I got to come in, I got to clean the church. I got to come in, I got to make sure all the chairs are perfectly fine. I got to come in, I got to prepare the sermon on the board. You know, I got to go in the parking lot, make sure the parking lot's clean for Sunday. And then you got some people that just walk through the door because they want to spend time with their Father. The altar, we praise and worship. We have a sermon. We open up the altars. They come just to spend time with God. And they lay at the foot of the altar. And they worship him and they praise him and they enjoy being with God. And you got some people that just show up, don't do anything, and don't even spend time with God. They sit in the seat, they hear the sermon, and walk out the door, and they feel like they've done what they need to do. They spent an hour and a half at church, and they leave. I'm not saying it's wrong to serve in the church, but there is times where you need to stop doing in the church and just experience God. Quit being so focused on the material things of the church, the building, the things we go through. We do this and this, and focus on God. And the other aspect too is sometimes we need to do things because things need to get done. You know, we need to find that mix. But it says in Luke 10:38-42, it says, as Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he taught. But Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. She came to Jesus and said, Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits there while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me. But the Lord said to her, my dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. There is only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her. She discovered it. You know, when you meet God, really meet God, and find God and get a connection with God and get that bond, that relationship, you're going to want to never leave his feet. You're never going to want to walk away from him. You're never going to want to go back to where you were before. You're not going to want to go in the kitchen and do the dishes, prepare the meal, and cook and clean. You're going to lay at his feet forever. And God knew that. And he didn't rebuke Mary. He really didn't rebuke Martha, but he kind of told her, hey, leave Mary alone. She knows what she's doing. She's discovered it. She's where she needs to be. Because at the end of the day, is a clean house more important than spending time with your Father? Is a prepared meal more important than spending time with God? Is a straight row of pews more important than being at the altar, seeking after God for his blessing, his direction, his guidance in your life? Is it? I don't know. Solomon made a temple. There was 3 sections to this temple. There was an outer courts, a holy place, and a holy of holies. You know, there's a song I've been listening to. It's called Take Me into the Holy of Holies. You know, I want to go past the brazen altar, through the incense, into the Holy of Holies. You know, the outer courts is where you'd walk in. You had the brazen altar of the sacrifice for the burnt animals. And then you have what was called the brazen sea, which was a big old thing full of water. And they would take it and they would put it in smaller little containments with wheels. And they would clean, make sure the priest would make sure they cleaned. They'd make sure the altar was clean for the sacrifices. Had everything clean and ready to go before they started making sacrifices. Anybody could go out there. They'd go, they'd bring in animals. But only the priests were allowed into the holy place. And in the Holy of Holies, only the high priest was allowed. So you'd have the outer courts, and then you go into the holy place. They had 10 menorahs, which was the lampstands. They had 5 on each side. You know, you had the table of showbread, where they did communion. The priest would go in there and eat the bread. Only prepared for him that he could eat. And then you had the altar of incense, where the priest would light it and he'd pray the prayers of the saints. He'd pray to God. And then you had the veil that separated the holy place with the Holy of Holies. And only the high priest, he'd go. He'd pull back the veil. He'd go into the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant sat. You know, the Ark of the Covenant, some people say, is the most powerful thing on this world. Some say they don't know where it's at. Some say they found it. And what it was the 10 Commandments were in it. But on top of that was the mercy seat. The mercy seat was a golden lid placed on the top of the Ark of the Covenant, where God's presence manifested. It was also known as the propitiation seat, and on the Day of Atonement, once a year, the high priest would enter in the Holy of Holies and sprinkle the blood of a sacrificial animal, typically a goat, on the mercy seat. So once a year they would do that. The purpose of the sacrifice, this act of sprinkling the blood served as means of atonement or forgiveness for the sins of the people. It's important to note that the animal was killed elsewhere, and the blood was then brought to the mercy seat to be sprinkled. This mercy seat itself was not the altar for the slaughter. So they would slaughter them in the outer courts, and then they'd burn them on the burnt offering. Then they'd bring the blood, just the blood, and they'd put the blood on the mercy seat. You know, there's a story, and every time I watch this story, there's a guy named Ron Wyatt, and he passed away now, and he was an archaeologist. And he tells his stories. He was walking through Jerusalem, and all of a sudden he stops, and he points to the right, and he says, "That's Jeremiah's grotto, and the Ark of the Covenant is below it." So he goes and years, and he digs, and he digs, and he digs. He's going through these caves, and he's in the cave with the camera, and he's telling the story, and he starts crying, and I'm like, I can't tell you 100% that it's true or not. I believe it is. And he says he goes in there, and he goes through this little small channel, and he finds the Ark of the Covenant buried deep in there. And he looks on the mercy seat, and he finds some blood. He takes a sample of it, he puts it in a little container, and he gets out, and he says he took it to some lab in Jerusalem over there. And the guys are examining the blood, and they look at it, and they tell him, they're like, there's something wrong with this blood. All the chromosomes it's supposed to have are not here. It only has the chromosomes from the mom's side. Nothing of the father is in the blood. Whose blood is this? They ask him. And he tears up and he tells them, this is the blood of your Messiah, who you crucified. And it's like a slap in the face when you hear that. It's like, man. But the way I see it is this. Jesus Christ got on that cross and he died. And when he said, it is finished, the earth shook, the rock split. That blood came down from his body through the split in the rock all the way down. And God had that mercy seat set at the bottom. Jesus Christ's blood laid on that mercy seat for the sacrifice of everybody's sins for all eternity. One last time, blood got on that mercy seat was the blood of our Savior, Jesus Christ, for our sacrifices. Never again would another ounce of blood touch that mercy seat. And I hear that story, and that's what I think about, and I'm like, it's perfect. It makes perfect sense. And he says, God told him not to reveal it. It will be revealed in time when he's ready. And now you hear stories, well, it's in Ethiopia, it's over here, it's over there. I can't tell you where it's at. But all I can tell you is this. Jesus died on that cross. Our sins are forgiven by his blood, by what he did on that cross. I don't need an altar made out of acacia wood. I don't need an altar, a brazen altar, an altar of incense. After Jesus Christ died on that cross, all I need is a will to seek my Father. And it does not matter where I do it. It matters that I do it. It does not matter where I put my knees down and pray. It matters that I do. You know, he says, I've made an advocate to the Father. He's got a direct line from us to him. All we got to do is get on our knees and pray whatever we need. So I say today, doesn't matter what you're going through. It doesn't matter what you need, you don't need. It doesn't matter. You come to the altar, lay it at his feet, and let God handle it. You know, we can come here, ask for forgiveness. We can come here, ask for help in our struggles and our needs, or we can come here simply to praise and worship and spend time at his feet. Get away from all the hustle and bustle and connect with God. God, I come to you today and I thank you for everything you've done for us. I thank you down on that cross, Jesus. And we bring all our problems, our struggles, our needs, our concerns, we lay them at the foot of this altar. We ask you to take them away, take control of them, put your hand in the middle of it. But more importantly, we come and we lay at the foot of this altar just to spend time with you, just to connect with you, have a relationship with you, to get away from everything of this world, plug into you, and recharge. And I thank you for being there for us when we need you. In your mighty name I pray. Amen.